Hey there. In all the years that I've been knitting, I don't think I've met anybody who has not been interested in learning how or figuring out how to knit just a little bit faster. I myself have been obsessed with this topic for many years now, and so today we are going to talk about how we can learn to knit a little bit faster and more efficiently. Hey there, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Felicia from SweetGeorgia and also the School of SweetGeorgia. And today we want to talk about some things that I have picked up over the years to try to knit a little bit faster and a little bit more efficiently. So if you have been following this channel since 2017 when we started posting videos, you might know that I'm a little bit obsessed with the idea of knitting fast or speed knitting. Speed knitting has been a thing at the back of my mind for a long time because I don't know about you, but don't we all want to finish our projects a little bit faster so that we can make the next project? I find myself always wanting to experiment with different ideas, and so being able to knit fast just helps me get to the next experiment that I'm going to work on, like next exploration. So that's part of the reason why I've wanted to learn how to knit fast. It's part of the reason why machine knitting really appeals to me as well. So today I want to talk about some of those things that I've learned over the past couple of years to try to help make my knitting a little bit faster and a little bit more efficient. Now, speed is basically a physics equation. It is distance over time. How much distance do you cover over a given amount of time? So everything about speed when it comes to knitting has to do with how many stitches can you form per certain amount of time. And so in order to form those stitches more quickly, there's a couple of things that we can do. And there's a couple of things that might speed up or slow down that entire process. So first off, we're going to talk about how you form those stitches. And so that is really talking about how you knit. Do you knit English style? Do you knit Continental style? Do you knit lever style? So there's all different ways that you can hold your needles and hold your yarn that might help or hinder your knitting speed. So let's look at a few of those. So I have here just cast on 25 stitches. I am using a regular sort of worsted weight. This is our superwash worsted in strawberry tea. It's a worsted weight yarn, and I am using a 4.5 millimeter or US 7 size knitting needles. So this is a very standard setup, okay? And we're gonna look at a couple of different ways of forming your stitches or knitting stitches. So the first one is English style. English style is where you hold your yarn in your right hand. So I'm gonna tension my yarn in my right hand. I normally tension over my pinky, over my ring finger, and holding it up with my index finger. So I'm holding my yarn in my right hand and I form stitches in this way by wrapping the yarn around the needle and then picking up the stitch like so. So this is how I knit English style. This is the first way that I learned when I was back in grade 4 from a black and white pamphlet. And when I knit in this way, you can see that I'm holding the yarn like so, and I'm basically moving my hand back and forth horizontally like this, like a shuttle. It's carrying the yarn back and forth along this path. I am able to sort of let go of my yarn because I'm holding my whole project with the fingers, or sort of my index finger, my middle finger, and my thumb of my left hand. I'm holding the project up, so I don't need to carry onto this. I'm not holding onto my right-handed needle. And so that leaves my hand free to move back and forth like so. I'm basically letting go each time. But the project is not flopping down because I'm holding it with my left hand, really. Now, in order to make the process of making these stitches, to make it a little bit easier and quicker, what I'm trying to do is to reduce the amount of motion that I'm going through, like reduce unnecessary hand movements. So when I'm doing this, I am trying to not move my whole wrist. I'm not trying to move my whole elbow or anything like that. I'm just trying to move as little as possible. So it's almost like a flick of the finger, like so, right? Moving just ever so slightly. So we want to minimize movement, minimize the distance that your hand is going. Okay, so this is how much your hand is moving. And my left hand is active. My left hand is constantly monitoring and pushing up the stitches on the left hand side so that they are available and ready to be knit. Okay. So that is basically knitting English style. Now, people always tell me that knitting Continental is a way faster way of knitting. And so I learned how to knit Continental as well. So basically, in order to knit Continental, you're holding your yarn in your left hand. So I tension my yarn in my left hand around my pinky finger, above my ring finger here, and then above my index finger again, like so. And then I knit stitches like this when I knit Continental. So I'm going into the stitch, picking up the yarn that's in the back and pulling it through. And so this is called picking. And this whole process of knitting Continental or picking your stitches can be very fast because I'm not actually moving my yarn at all. I'm not moving this yarn hand at all. The only part that I'm moving is basically the tip of my right needle where it's going in, it's scooping, it's coming out. It's going in, it's scooping, it's coming out. It's going in, scoop, coming out. So there's very little movement happening. And so because you're minimizing the movement, you can actually form each stitch a little bit faster. So that is Continental knitting. Now there has been a website that has been up and running for more than 10 years, 15 years now, called Heartstrings. And so you can Google this, but lever knitting on heartstrings. You can find step-by-step illustrations on how to knit lever style. I also learned how to knit lever style, also known as Irish cottage knitting, from Stephanie Pearl McPhee, or the Yarn Harlot. And she taught a workshop, and we all learned how to knit like the Yarn Harlot does. And so in order to knit sort of lever style, you can hold and tension your yarn in a number of different ways. And now basically every knitter that I've ever met has held their yarn or tensioned their yarn in a slightly different way anyways. So however you want to carry your yarn in order to do these techniques is really up to you. But when I learned lever knitting from the Heartstrings website, I can still continue to tension my yarn the same way I do as I do with English style. And instead of holding my needle, my right needle, from above, my hand sort of on top of the needle, I would move my hand underneath the needle. Okay, so I'm carrying this right hand needle kind of like a pencil almost. And so I have my thumb underneath and I form stitches like so. So this is how I knit lever style. So you can see here, I am sort of managing and holding the stitches on my right hand needle with my middle finger and with my thumb. And I'm, again, this is my flying finger, my index finger is up, and this is what I'm using to serve as the lever that is like allowing that yarn to wrap around the needle. This is a little bit like the action of a sewing machine. If you've ever seen the inside of a sewing machine or the inside of a serger, there's one piece that kind of whips back and forth like so, and that is what this finger is doing here. And you can see as the stitches get bunched up on the right hand side, I have to slide them down, and then my thumb goes underneath the fabric, and then I just continue. Now, another way that I learned to tension my yarn for lever knitting is to hold my yarn in between my first and second finger, wrap it around the middle finger, hold it up with the ring finger. Okay. So what that looks like is like so. Like so. And then what I would do is I would use my first finger, my index finger, and my thumb to operate my needle. And then I would use my ring finger as that flying lever, or the sort of the shuttle that's going back and forth. Now, this lever style of knitting is actually very helpful if you knit with long, straight needles. Long, straight needles that you could tuck under your arm and knit like so. Or what people have done is if you have long double pointed needles, you can also get something called a knitting belt. And a knitting belt, you would wear it and it has little holes. It looks kind of like a banana with holes in it that's strapped to a belt. And you basically stick one end of your long double pointed knitting needle into that little belt, and then you can knit or work all of your stitches off of the long straight needle in that way. And so the way that this would look is if you were to tension your yarn. I'm going to tension it how I normally do for my English style knitting. And I just keep my hand in one spot. So sticking your knitting needle under your arm might feel a little bit awkward to begin with, but obviously the more you do this, the easier it's going to get. Any of these techniques, any of these knitting styles, you're going to just want to practice and you will get faster, you will get better at all of them over time. Now, a couple more things that I wanted to mention is that initially I was using this needle. This is a Chiagu stainless steel needle. It is great. The surface of this metal is nice and slick, and it just, nothing really catches. It doesn't stick. It's just very nice and slippery without being too slippery. The points are nice and sharp. These are knitting needles that I have loved for a long, long time. Before that, I had a whole collection of signature needles, which I also really quite enjoy. And these also have a really nice surface. They have a great sharp point. The cords are nice and soft, all of these wonderful things. But unfortunately, signature needles are no longer made. And so almost all of my needles now are these Chiagu needles. I have here these straight metal needles. These are ancient needles from I don't even know when, but these are out of aluminum. These feel, they're metal, but they're still a little bit more grippy than these Chiagu needles for whatever reason. So you might find that if you are working with wood or bamboo needles, you might find that the surface of this is a little bit more grippy. And so your stitches might not slide along as smoothly as if they were with a metal needle. And so you might find that the texture or the surface, the material of the needle that you're working with might kind of slow down your knitting process as well. Another thing that you will notice that I do when I knit is I make sure that all of the stitches on my left hand needle are scrunched up towards the tip of my needles. And so that way these are all queued up and ready to be knit. Whereas the ones on my right hand needle, as they are being knit, I spread them down the needle to make space for new stitches to be passed over. So this is one of the things that helps speed up your knitting as well, to make sure that the stitches are ready to be knit, they're queued up to the tip, ready to be knit, and as they are being knit, that they're being moved out of the way to make room for more stitches to come into the mix. One more thing is that we're talking a lot about knitting close to the tip of your knitting needles, so that way you are minimizing the distance that your hand or the yarn needs to go. But it's also very important to make sure that you're not making your stitches at the tips, not on the tips of your needles, but that you're forming your stitches still on the main part of the shaft of your knitting needle so that the stitches are the right size. If you form your stitches at the tip of your needle, they are going to be a smaller diameter than the actual needle. And so when they are slid onto the needle, they're going to be too tight. And so if you're trying to knit with very, very tight stitches, it's going to make it more difficult to knit those stitches, and that will also slow you down, just kind of fighting with the tension of those stitches. Now, finally, before we move on from the idea of knitting styles, I want you to think about which style gives you the best posture, which one helps make your shoulders feel the most relaxed, and how you can knit for longer periods of time without injuring yourself or hurting your body or causing any sort of tension. I know that when I knit with certain styles, my shoulders kind of tend to go up and I feel a little bit more tense, and I need to spend a little bit more time relaxing or taking a deep breath and making sure that I'm not gathering a lot of tension up in my shoulders. So that happened for me definitely when I was knitting Continental style. I was told that knitting Continental would mean that you could knit much faster. But I find that when I'm knitting Continental, because so much of the work is involved with the right hand needle moving and sort of manipulating this right hand to move the needle, I feel like I develop a lot more tension in my body that way. And so it's maybe not the ideal way for me to knit, but it could be for you. So it all depends on what works best for you. So even though I learned how to knit English style as a kid, right now I'm in a bit of a phase where I'm focusing on practicing more lever knitting because just the way that you hold your needles where the hands are up and the wrists are up, I believe that it is supposed to offer more ergonomic benefits. It's supposed to help your body and your posture a little bit better. And so that's one of the things that has been on my mind the most when I am thinking about doing more knitting now. So we've so far talked about speed as it relates to how much distance can you cover over a certain amount of time, how many stitches can you form in a certain amount of time, how can you make those stitches even faster by minimizing your hand movements, minimizing the length of space that your hand needs to move in order to make those stitches. We talked about the materials and basically reducing friction so that way you can increase your speed by using different knitting needle materials. We also need to talk a little bit about efficiency in terms of knowing what you're doing before you sit down to knit. One of the things that I've come to realize is that you can knit 100 miles an hour, let's just say, but if you're going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction, then that's not helpful at all because then you eventually have to backtrack and undo all of the things that you have sped up to do. And so that is not helpful at all. So for example, when I first started making this video, I was demonstrating on my night shift shawl here, which is designed by Andrea Mowry, and I am knitting it out of my own handspun. I've been working on it for some time, adding handspun as I make the handspun. But as I was knitting on this project, I realized that I've done an entire row incorrectly. And so I actually have to rip back 2 rows in order to fix the problem that I created for myself. And so this is where you can knit as fast as you want. You can form those stitches as quickly as you want. But if you're doing the wrong thing, then you're still not going to get to the end of your project. You're not going to get to the end of that experimental sort of whatever it is that you're making. And so this is where it's really, really important to sort of look at your pattern. What are you making? Read ahead. Know what the instructions are going to be. I know I have to do this. Well, you have to do this when you're cooking. You have to figure out, how long is it going to take to do this part of the process? How long is it going to be to preheat the oven? How long is it going to be chilling in the fridge? How long is it going to be baking? All of the things that you need to know. You should know these things ahead of time so that way you don't end up as I did. I tried to make these cardamom buns over Christmas and I got all the timing wrong. I didn't sort of read ahead and really figure out exactly how much time was needed. And so I was up at 1 o'clock in the morning on the night between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 1 o'clock in the morning, making my cardamom buns because that was the time when the dough was ready and I had to set it up to proof. And so if I had planned ahead and done my timing a little bit different, I wouldn't have been doing it at 1 a.m. I would have been doing it at, 9 p.m. So if you are going to be working on a sweater or working on a bigger project, then you need to know, do you have enough yarn? Have you read the instructions? Do you know what's coming next? Have you followed all of the instructions to know that you're doing the correct thing? So that way you don't have to spend 3 hours working on something in one direction and then realize, oh, all of this is wrong and you have to undo the work that you've done for 3 hours, because that's not really a good use of time. That's not efficient at all. Finally, I think my last point is really just about the philosophical question of why do we want to knit so fast in the first place? If we are enjoying every single stitch that we're making and we're enjoying the process of seeing the yarn and the colors sort of flow through our hands, why do we need it to zoom past in the first place? Why don't we just enjoy every stitch for what it is? That's definitely one way that I encourage you to look at it. Just knit at the speed that you are able to. Don't hurt your body. Don't end up, spending 3 hours doing something where your shoulders are all tensed up and then you end up injuring yourself. That's not good at all, then you can't knit at all. But at the same time, looking a little bit about whatever technique or style of knitting that you already do and seeing if there's ways that you can tweak it so that way you can minimize your hand movements a little bit, minimizing the amount of time that you spend making bigger motions with your body, all sorts of things like that maybe can help just improve your knitting speed just a little bit and help you get a little bit closer to the end of your project so that way you can experiment with and try the next project, try another thing, try another project, try another technique. So many things to knit and explore in our lifetimes that I absolutely understand the desire to get to the next project and get to the next project. But just take a moment and think while you're knitting your current project, just enjoy the process of what you're doing and enjoy making those stitches and seeing that yarn and that color flow through your hands, because it's the best part and it's the most fun. So thank you so much for being here to watch this. I hope that this helps you just a little bit. I would love to hear from you and what you do with your entire knitting practice. What style do you knit? What's been working for you? What's not been working for you? How do you manage to finish all the projects that you finish? I would love to hear about all your tips and suggestions as well. Thank you guys so much for watching this. If you are interested in learning more about knitting and the fiber arts, you can find us at sweetgeorgiayarns.com. We have lots of articles and tutorials there, and you can also find our knitting courses at the School of SweetGeorgia.com. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.